I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I did and work out how I got here, because it's quite an interesting journey. Whilst I have the forehead of a techie, I'm not a techie, okay? I don't do development. The only bit of code I've ever written was a QBasic program in 1995, which was a shop inventory. So that's as much as I've done in terms of coding. I have launched Africa's first AI magazine called Synapse. It's on the Issue platform if you want to go and have a look at it. It's all about real-world AI, data science in Africa. Free to contribute to, free to advertise in, and you write it, we'll publish it essentially. Also, AI Expo Africa is the largest business-focused event, so it's a gathering like this, but it's mainly business and suppliers, and we also open it up to young engineers and students to attend for free. It's part of our goal to join up the community, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. I'm also the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer for the CORTEX Group. We're an AI solutions company based in Cape Town. And I also work with Jacques Ludic and the Machine Intelligence Institute of Africa, trying to grow that network around the continent. Cheers. So this is what I did, okay? So this was about the only photo I could find of me at university where I wasn't in fancy dress, naked or in some form of compromised situation. So I apologise for that. But when I started university, I actually started as a chemist, and I had hair then. This is what the Apple Mac looked like. It was a monochrome screen. This is what a smartphone looked like, and I'm reliably told they cost $3,000 in 1988. And that's what the internet looked like in '93 when I logged onto it, and I didn't even know what it was. There was a thing, words that were underlined. I clicked on them, a new page came up, a thing called a URL, obviously, but didn't even know what that was. I then went on to do a PhD in analytical science, which 25 years later seems relevant because I was actually studying precision and accuracy and bias in complex systems, which obviously from an AI point of view is quite important now. So I've got a quick quiz. I'll give you the answer at the end. Have we got any Manchester United fans here? There's always a few. So what does Alex Ferguson, Malcolm Gladwell, and the lady that discovered or put the picture of the black hole up have in common? So have a think about it. We'll come back to it. So I spend a lot of time outside of doing all that stuff trying to work out how we can better join up the communities. Okay, so there's an academic community, a funnel, if you want to call it that. Young people, these blue dots are young people. Go through a funnel, they learn stuff, they graduate, they maybe do a postgraduate, they might do a postdoc, and then they go into the world of work, or they go into more research, or they go down the entrepreneurial route, or become unemployed, depends which one you want to do. Obviously that takes you down probably into a corporate environment. The fun bit is if you go this way, and it goes more entrepreneurial, you can do some interesting things there. Clearly, you need time, money, and be willing to take a risk. And what we're trying to do with things like AI Expo and the work we're doing with MIIA is we're trying to join up some of these gaps. We're trying to better understand what's going on inside universities from an investment perspective. Industry would love to know what's going on inside Stellenbosch, UCT, UWC, Pretoria, etc. Why? Because they have problems that they'd like to solve, okay? And it might be that you guys can solve them for them. Investors equally would like to tap into young minds and find out where the new entrepreneur is going to come from and build a pipeline of businesses that they can fund. When I met 4 entrepreneurs last year, invited them to AI Expo from UCT, and I asked them, does your university know that you exist? And they said no. I said, does your department know that you exist? And they said no. So it's a bit weird that there's entrepreneurism going on inside universities, and yet really no one seems to know about it, apart from the entrepreneurs that are doing it for themselves. So I think that's an area where we can improve. And also, in terms of finding funding, once you move into this stage here, it's very difficult to actually get funding to start your business. Most VCs won't give you money until you've got 3 years worth of trading behind you. And if people are willing to take a risk on you, that's typically going to be seed-like funding, might come from an angel investor, might come from a collection of angel investors. It certainly won't come from the bank. It might come from your friends and family. So what we're trying to do is also see if there's areas we can improve on that, okay? So if we get this right, and I think Salitsi was talking about it this morning, we can create a pipeline for growth. And I'm hoping that the Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission that's now been set up start to look at how we can find the gaps in this and plug those gaps going forward. I presented this last year in September. This is a chart that lists all the AI startups globally. It's done by a French analyst company. And as you can see, Africa is blank. By the time we got to about September last year, we'd mapped about 213 companies that were doing AI in Africa. Most of them were native, small companies, and there were obviously some international ones. I wrote to the CEO of this analyst firm and asked if I could share my information with him. He never responded. And these are the analysts that you have to buy their reports from, okay? And I'll talk about how we've solved a solution to this problem in a minute. If you look at the Gartner hype cycle, and apologies for the resolution on this, but that was this is the state of ICT in Africa last year from Gartner. It doesn't even mention machine learning on that curve at all, not even on a hype cycle. So even Gartner, as an analyst firm, is way behind the curve at knowing what's going on our beautiful continent. So how do we understand this landscape? How can we foster greater integration? That's a big thing I'm working on at the moment. This was from a slide at a conference I was at last week in Kenya, and this was looking at the readiness of governments around the world to embrace AI, machine learning, Fourth Industrial Revolution. It was done by the IDRC, Canadian Development Corporation, and as you can see, unsurprisingly, parts of Africa still pretty unready, but other parts of it are much more ready than others. So places like Ghana, Kenya, Tunisia, Morocco. Obviously places like North America, France in particular, Canada especially, have got big, huge spending behind AI by their governments, and it's seen as a massive engine for growth. So really moving on to the community side of it. So I've really come to this space fairly new in the last 18 months, and I've realised there are some quite large gaps, and as an entrepreneur, my job is always to solve a problem if I see it. And if I can't solve it with my money, I'll solve it with someone else's money. That's what entrepreneurs do. So if you want to make progress, it is quicker to do it as a community, because we can move much quicker than, say, government can, or even a corporate. Corporates are actually traditionally very slow, and governments are even slower. So if we can solve these problems ourselves, we'll actually start to build this picture up, and these communities will actually help everyone in terms of progressing their career, which is what really this talk should be about. So there are a whole range of communities across Africa, some of which you've probably heard of, some of which will be familiar to you on this chart, some may be new. This isn't even comprehensive, so there are lots of meetups going on. There's lots of small groups of people meeting informally, fairly routinely, to talk about all sorts of topics. And they do tend to be fairly technically focused, which is one of the reasons why we set up AI Expo, which was to be more real world, less technically focused, more applied. But there is a lot going on. And yeah, I encourage you to go and look at some of these things. I'll talk about the wiki in a minute. But so I gave a lecture at UCT the other day, and it was interesting. People were asking me about, how do I take my next step in after university? How do I get in a job? How do I take the next step in life? And one of my suggestions is to embrace the word serendipity. The fact that you guys have come into this room rather than go into the other room is an example of serendipity. You've come in here, you've never met me, you don't know who I am, you don't know what I'm going to talk about. And actually from this you might come away with an idea, or you meet someone in this room, or you have a moment and then suddenly that changes your trajectory, you move in a different direction. For me, serendipity's meant, a big one for me was typing the word internet dating into Google in 2003. That's how I met my South African wife. That's why I'm here. So trust me, internet dating in 2003 was not like Tinder. It was pretty basic and very hit and miss, trust me. So that's a good example of how just typing a search phrase, e.g. into Google, can change your life. Turning up at a lecture out of hours can change your life. I know for one of the guys that turned up at the UCT event, he had a startup that he's been working on, and he approached us afterwards and wanted to have a conversation about can we get investment, etc., etc. So if I hadn't turned up, he hadn't been there, he would have missed out on that opportunity. So most of what happens in your life is going to happen outside of normal working hours. It's going to happen by going to a community event. I encourage you to go to community events. There's a lot of them, as I've said, but go to them. Say hello to the person next to you. Print out some business cards in post and print and hand them out, and start networking. You will discover a whole new world that doesn't involve having to study for a degree. Hands up who uses LinkedIn. Okay, hands up who uses it often and keeps their profile updated. Okay, so I started using LinkedIn when it started, or just after it launched, and yeah, it was a bit crazy back then. It was a bit sort of tumbleweedy and not many people using it, but it grew very quickly, and it is improving, and there's a lot of utility in there. And I'd encourage communities, obviously exist like we are now, face to face. But actually there's a whole raft of stuff going on LinkedIn you can tap into. You can start following hashtags, you can find out about who's doing what in what company, reach out, ask someone to do an internship. We run a company, we're looking for new people all the time, and use that profile. Don't put in your job title that you are a maven, a rainmaker. Don't do that, okay? Put a nice profile picture up, and just put a basic title about what you do, and use it, and post content. By posting content, you get recognised, and post relevant content. And also then people start to find you, they start to see your profile, and definitely encourage it as a kind of online community that you should be using all the time. So, not many people, unless you followed the Super GP motorcycle in events of 1970s, which was probably not many people in this room. There was a famous British motorcyclist called Barry Sheen. I think he's famous for breaking every bone in his body. And he's got this famous saying, don't wait for your boat to come in, swim out and bloody meet the thing. Don't wait, don't think that a job is just going to appear out of nowhere by filling in endless forms and applying for jobs. Just write to someone, write to an employer, go and ask them, say, hey, I'm looking for a job. And what's the worst they can say? They can say no, but the best they can say is say, come and have a coffee and we'll have a chat. So definitely, again, dive in. A lot of the communities I've been to have been very, very welcoming. I think there was one meetup, I think, on some obscure part of machine learning. It said, don't attend if you don't understand linear statistics. Well, I don't, so I didn't go. But that community was very clear about what its principles were. Most of the communities don't have that level of kind of strictness. So again, don't be put off by going and not understanding necessarily everything they're talking about, but just go in and meet new people and dive in. So I guess this is my pitch. I haven't got long to talk, but as an entrepreneur, if I see a problem, I'll solve a problem. And one of the reasons why we launched Synapse magazine was that I was a little bit tired talking to IT Web and IT News Africa and wanting to say, hey, look, there's this news story, there's some good stuff going on here with machine learning, deep learning in Africa, and you guys aren't talking about it. They said, well, we'll talk about it, but we'll only talk about it if you pay. So that's called advertising or paid for op-ed, okay? Well, that's not news, okay? So we launched the magazine because no one really wanted to tell news. They just wanted you to pay. So that was one thing that we did. We're actually announcing it this week. We've created AIAfrica.wiki. It's a 54-country listing of everything that's going on in Africa with regards machine learning, deep learning. Same categories in every country, everything from published government policy through to lists of universities conducting research, what they're conducting it on, thought leaders, events, VCs, investors that are investing in startups. So this is going to be curated by you guys, not by me. We're looking for volunteers, people, even if you just publish one entry on the wiki, that'll be great. We've had our first volunteer from Burkina Faso, which we're quite proud about. But we'll be making this more public this week, and we'll make you an editor, and then you can just populate what's relevant to you for your little section on there. And hopefully, with the network effect, 100 people tell 100 people tell 100 people, that's 1 million people. Hopefully we'll have a few editors around the continent who can publish that. So the other thing is, if you go to Cortex Group AI, so I work for Cortex Group, Cortex Logic is part of that group. We're launching a new venture capital company this week called Cortex Ventures. And Cortex Ventures is going to be Africa's first AI-only focused venture capital company. We're actually a hybrid venture capital company, so we do early stage, growth stage funding, and we have a co-working space and technical advisory and development capacity as well. And we're only focusing on AI based component. Well, your product or your solution has to have a component of AI in it. That's one of the criteria. It can be pre-MVP, MVP, post-MVP, you can be pre-revenue, post-revenue, doesn't really matter. We'll have a look at it, and if you go to the click to pitch button, you can just fill in some stuff, and then we'll have a look at your submission, and then we'll invite you in for a coffee. So what we're trying to do is grow. One of the big parts, I believe, of community is to help people make that next step, and Cortex Venture was created by myself and Jacques, really out of this necessity to help people make that next step. So you've come to this event now, you've come to this meeting, you've joined this community. This is something that we want to give back and say, hey, if you've got this idea, we'll fund it, we'll help you go on that journey. So final thing is it takes time. I don't know whether anyone likes malt whiskey in this room. It takes a minimum of 7 years to make malt whiskey, longer if you want to pay more money for it. But good things take time. And that's really the clue to the answer to the question. So has anyone got, I'm just going to wrap up, this is my last slide. So has anyone got an idea about this answer to this question?
What is the question?
So what have these guys got in common? So it's Alex Ferguson, Malcolm Gladwell, and the lady that published the picture of the black hole. So Malcolm Gladwell wrote the book, well, the thing about the concept about 10,000 hours. It takes about 10,000 hours to get good at one thing. So 10,000 hours divided by 8-hour working day, divided by about 200 working days in the year, 6 years. It's about 6.3 actually. Took Alex Ferguson 6 years to build his team. Everyone thinks Alex Ferguson was like, whoa, the manager from day one. Well, he was one game from getting sacked. He actually, if they'd lost against my team, which was Aston Villa, probably there's no Aston Villa fans in here, I guarantee it, he would have been sacked. He won that game, he went on to win the League Cup that year. The lady that published the picture of the black hole, she'd been working on that project for 6 years. She started work on it in 2013 and they published the picture just recently. So the thing I wanted to say was it does take time. It'll take time for our communities to get better, more integrated, to become well-oiled machines and to be really productive. And I think if you can take that away, don't get too impatient. Things take time. Ironically, I was reading that Einstein predicted what this black hole would look like 100 years ago, and it wasn't too far off what the image was that they actually ended up printing, so I think that's pretty cool. So I think that's me. Anyone got any questions?
Basically, just related to the title, where I might have missed it, where you spoke about using community development as a career growth, right? I just want you maybe to speak a bit on that. And then the second question is, what if, how, I don't know if you're knowledgeable about this, but how can you make career, like sort of community development your career?
I'll answer the second part of that first. I mean, to build AI Expo as a community took me a year. Well, it took me over a year. And that was full time. And that was unpaid. So you can make a career out of it. I think you have to be very clear about what your policy is. Are you a not-for-profit? Are you a commercially based one? Have you got funding from, you have to be quite clear on that. The first part of your question, to talk more about, there's just an implied notion that if you join a community, it is going to help your career. I mean, I built a career out of it, or part of my career out of it, because a community didn't exist, so I created one. But I know that we're trying to make people more aware of opportunities through community events. I mean, the event we did in September, we had a phone call from one of the larger ICT companies that said they wanted to go on an acquisition hunt of the companies that were in the event. So again, it goes back to this thing, career doesn't necessarily mean job. It might mean you start a business. It might mean that your business gets acquired. It might mean that your business gets funded. It might mean that you find a client. So I think career development actually means more than just a job. So I hope that's answered the question.